This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass.
Run down! Run down!
Good morning, I am Carrie Saldo. It is July 17th. Welcome to The Rundown. After nearly a week of hazy, brownish orange skies caused by smoke from Canadian wildfires, a bit of light blue coming to the skies around our Springfield studio this morning. Speaking of brightness and clarity, our rundowners this week: Dusty Christensen, investigations editor at The Shoestring; Rich Parr, the vice president at Mass Inc. Polling Group; Aaron Lee Hoffman, a reporter at the Greenfield Recorder; and NEPM's own news reporter, Phil Bishop. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Hey,
Morning.
good morning.
If you have thoughts, you can email the rundown at nepm.org, and be sure to check out our YouTube live stream. Our first topic this morning: not one drop is the headline. Frustrated Quabbin communities thirst for water, money, access, cooperation. This from Jim Kinney of the Springfield Republican. Kids in Belchertown won't play soccer and football on their home fields this fall for want of irrigation. Meanwhile, the Quabbin Reservoir, which is in their backyard, sends 208 million gallons of water a day east to slake Boston's thirst. Slake, I love that word. I looked it up. To quench thirst. In New Salem, the town hall and police station have no water at all. Their old hand-dug well having run dry. Those are the first examples that State Rep Aaron Saunders of Belchertown gave last Friday, as more than 100 people who live around the Quabbin got a rare chance to air their grievances in person to the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority Board of Directors. Phil Bishop, you took a look at this for NEPM as well. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so this is sort of it is kind of a long-standing, I'm going to use the language of kind of like a resentment that has sort of come to the head with the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority. The Quabbin is a vast water resource that this authority oversees, and it is primarily in service of towns in the eastern part of the state. But the cities and towns that actually steward the Quabbin, the people that surround it, the towns that are required to maintain it for the purpose of this water resource for the eastern part of the state, the money that they get from the state to do that, it's a payment in lieu of taxes system. Broadly, really broadly, like many of these towns have filed, municipal resolutions that setup is no longer equitable. It is not, they are not getting enough money compared to the cost of stewarding the Quabbin, on top of the general municipal budget pressures that everybody in Massachusetts is going through for things like insurance. We've seen, I believe, at least a handful of these Quabbin towns have, either gone through or are going through the Proposition 2.5 override process to try to collect more tax revenue. And it came to a head last week. This board of directors meeting was packed with, residents, state representatives for these communities. Aaron Saunders spoke, really intensely about it at the beginning of this meeting. And the idea is they would like the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority and the state legislature more broadly to renegotiate, to kind of determine if there is a way to do this that is more equitable to these cities and towns who objectively put in a lot of work for a resource that they do not receive.
And in addition to that money piece, folks also raised frustrations at this meeting last week, and then also more recently kind of trickling out, no pun intended, over the course of the last few years, just saying, look, we steward this water, but we're not drinking it. We don't get to tap into it. Rich, as a pollster, you've kind of had a front row seat to public opinion, what people are thinking on a range of issues. Are you surprised that people who steward the Quabbin haven't balked at this breakdown sooner?
Well, I mean, you couldn't come up with a better metaphor for the relationship between eastern Massachusetts and western Massachusetts than the Quabbin Reservoir, right? Like, we literally flooded 4 towns.
Yeah.
They
In the
don't
1930s.
exist anymore.
Yeah.
In the
Destroyed them.
1930s, destroyed them in order to enable the development of population and economics in Eastern Mass. And Eastern Mass is doing really well, and Western Mass is not doing really as well by a lot of measures, and just doesn't feel as connected to what's going on in the eastern part of the state in the ways that we would like to. So I think this really does tap into that resentment. I was really struck by some of the details in the story about, as you mentioned, like wells that are running dry in some of these towns. The fact that because they're in the watershed, they can't do development. They can't, have a real estate project that might develop some tax revenue for the town. The fact that the firefighters have to cut locks to get into the Quabbin if they need to go perform like a rescue, like they did when a plane crashed in the Quabbin a couple of months ago. There's really this sort of lack of coordination that I think is really striking. It's not just the water part of it; it's just the fact that, or the money part of it. It's the fact that there's, I think, a little bit of disrespect happening here. It's a little bit of a Rodney Dangerfield situation here going on with the towns around the Quabbin compared to what's going on in the eastern part of the state.
Can't get no respect.
No respect.
And further complicating this, some of the folks who live around the Quabbin, their well water is contaminated. We've been finding out we've talked about it in the show over the past year or so, PFAS, these forever chemicals. Some of these wells are also contaminated with that, and then they can't tap into the Quabbin. So it's a real challenge here. A quote from Senator Comerford out of Northampton: "It's not about charity. It's about a partnership. We can't fix the injustice of 100 years ago, but we can be more equitable now." Dusty, do you think, if this move for a sort of a revamped partnership will be well received by the eastern part of the state? It's about maybe an education, a reminder of what was given up to help support them, or how do you think it'll be received?
Oof. I mean, anytime we talk about the eastern part of the state, giving Western Mass its fair due, I think a lot of people end up disappointed out here. I should say that the Governor Maura Healey's administration has this commission to study these payment in lieu of tax systems, or pilots as they're called, and thinking more about equity. This is a topic that you hear whether it's in Holyoke, where the state owns a lot of conservation land, or obviously in places like the Quabbin. Hopefully that does result in some additional payments to communities who feel like the state's not kicking in their fair share. This has been a conversation that's been going on for a really long time, and to date, there has not been any resolution. So,
Erin Lee, we're going to talk later in the show about the rural policy plan that you've done some reporting on. As I understand it, the Quabbin, it plays a role in that policy plan too. Give us a little bit.
Sure, it sure does. I think the policy plan itself really looks kind of a very variety part of topics and everything like that, and included in it is talking a bit about these payment in lieu of taxes, and that, talking about how we need to be focusing on equity, and that needs to be the long-term goal. And with this plan, it's meant to be very much a guidebook and sort of a way to chart your course over the next couple of years in terms of policy and advocacy. And definitely the payment in lieu of taxes, and looking at that and opening up that formula and seeing how it's impacting Western Mass communities is definitely going to be a big part of it. It's something that we touched on a little bit with the FERCog executive director Linda Dunlavy in our conversation. And even just to plug, there are a couple of public hearings with the pilot commission coming up over the next couple of weeks, and I believe Franklin County's was held last night, so we should be getting some reporting soon about those hearings and what people are sharing further. And it seems like it'll likely be an extension of what ultimately this discussion in Belchertown was all about.
Certainly more to come on all of this. And speaking of to be continued concerns here about a contract to construct a new Hampden County courthouse were reported by Springfield Republican Stephanie Barry on Monday. Quoting Stephanie's reporting, "Court employees are incensed over the selection of a Liberty Street site for the new Hampden County Courthouse, pointing to an internal analysis from court officials that ranked the location last among the project's top 3 proposals. Some elected officials remain skeptical of the awarding of the contract, as well as particularly on the heels of a lawsuit filed last Thursday in Hampden Superior Court by 2 losing bidders who allege conflicts of interest and question the bidding process." The story goes on to say that Hampden Superior Court Clerk Laura Gentile was among the first to voice an opinion. Quote, "That's a nightmare of a site. A lot of people at the courthouse feel like we might as well just stay here, and I'm one of them," she said during recent interviews. The current site, of course, is the Roderick J. Ireland Courthouse, and it's become known as a sick building because of the illnesses, and some fatal even, contracted by staff who have worked there. So many questions here. Let's start with how much consideration should be given to the people who work in this space, in and out every day. Thoughts on that, Phil Bishop?
I mean, I would say, ideally, the most consideration. They are the people who will be engaging with whatever the courthouse construction looks like, who will have to, determine its feasibility for their workflows. So certainly, if they are saying that this site is substandard or subpar, that's serious. That is definitely something to be of really key consideration. It doesn't seem like that is the case. I think there's still, again, you said it at the top, there are a lot of questions about this selection, about the process of the selection, and now that we have the lawsuit, maybe some of those questions are going to get answered. Healy spoke on it earlier this week, and she defended it. She said that this was the best option for taxpayers. So I guess that is kind of the key thing on the other side of the fence, is the idea that, this would be something that is the least expensive for people to do. But I do think that that needs to be weighted, sort of equally to, like, do court employees actually like the plan that has been submitted to them, even if it is the cheapest one.
Governor Healy had been sort of quiet in all of this since it was announced earlier this month, but she did. State House News quoted her as saying, "I'm all about supporting whatever is going to cost the taxpayers the least amount of money, as somebody who wants to protect taxpayer dollars." So that's what this selection resulted in, and it was the lowest cost bid through a competitive bid process, and it was selected by the trial court. That's what she said. But an internal analysis that Stephanie Barry quoted, obtained by the Republican of the winning Liberty Junction bid, cites safety concerns, design flaws, juror access concerns, and space constrictions that don't recognize the business that swells daily at the existing courthouse at 50 State Street. That's a quote there. Rich Parr, whether it's locally, nationally, state, is there a consensus among the general public when it comes to how they feel about some of these massive government contracts?
Yeah, I think this story is kind of bumping in two big trends that we see in public opinion. We talked about it with the Quabbin, this dynamic between the East and the West, and that our concerns are really being written off to say, like, well, this is the cheapest option, right? We're not talking about, like, what's best for the court employees. We're talking about what's cheapest for all of the taxpayers. But I think that there's also just, like, since the big dig, there has been this sort of skepticism bordering on cynicism about public contracts and how things get done in Massachusetts and how long it takes to get certain projects done. I hear it all the time when I do focus groups about transportation, that people are complain about why is that street getting torn up again? Why does it take so long to get this done? It just feels like the entire process is sort of gummed up in a way. And if you look at some of the players on this Boston bid, I mean, they are heavy hitters. John Fish of Suffolk Construction is a major political donor in the eastern part of the state. You have Ayanna Presley's husband is on the bid team. John Barrows, who just got appointed to the Convention Center Authority back east, and is a former official, I think, in the Marty Walsh administration in Boston. So there's a lot of politics on that team. It does get you to start to wonder. It's like, how could the least desirable of these three sites be chosen as the thing? Maybe it's the cheapest, but is it the best value for taxpayers if they're going to have to do a lot of work to make this site work for the needs of the court?
And the Division of Capital Asset Maintenance and Management, DCAM, as we all call it, said that the downtown location near public transit, the team's development experience, and the fact that, as we've talked about here, the lowest cost submitted of all bids, and one of the fastest project delivery schedules, scheduled for 2030, were the reasons that they tapped what Stephanie has brought to light as the number 3 bidder. And the analysis that Stephanie pointed to did compare the top 3 finalists, which were the Dwight Street proposal that came from James Belize, who's a well-known owner of Belize Motorsport
Big
Sales.
dog locally.
Yep. Yeah. And the Riverfront project, which Peter Piccinelli's team had backed, and he's the head of the Peter Pan Bus Company, but that was also heavily promoted by Springfield Mayor Dominic Sarno, which caused sparks locally here because folks were saying, look, the fix is in. Peter Piccinelli's going to be the winner. Mayor Sarno has put his weight behind this. So there are already questions, Dusty, about whether this was all on the up and up. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think to just give a little peek behind the curtain at something that we see all the time as reporters is what we like to call the Friday news dump. In other words, when somebody has a piece of news to deliver to the public and they are maybe anticipating a bad reaction or maybe worried about possible blowback from that reaction, they decide to put that news out on a Friday afternoon when reporters are getting ready to go home for the weekend, when the reading or listening public isn't paying as much attention. I should note that this announcement not only came on a Friday, it came
July 4th
it
weekend.
came right before the July 4th weekend. This is a huge announcement. A lot of people have been anticipating. This is a building, we have to remember, that is making people so sick sick, that some people even, I suppose, had terminal illnesses that were connected to issues in this building. It's a very serious issue for worker safety. And to make this announcement before a holiday weekend, I'm not going to get into the minds of the officials who did that. I just think that for us news reporters, it says a lot.
Yeah.
You scratch ahead
It's a
on
red
that one.
flag.
And
Yeah.
there's some big numbers attached to this contract before we had to break. It's a 40 to 60 year contract, right? Liberty Junction has said it's going to cost them about $600 million to build their proposal. But the cost for the state to occupy this project over the course of that lease is $1.94 billion is the estimate. So there's a hearing that was scheduled yesterday in Berkshire Superior Court that's now expected to be held in August in Springfield. Much more to come on this and more to come here on The Rundown. Be sure to stay with us. You are listening to The Rundown on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Stay with us.
The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I am Carrie Saldo, joined by journalist Dusty Christensen, Aaron Lee Hoffman, and Phil Bishop, as well as pollster Rich Parr. Welcome back, everybody. Let's dive right back into it. Reporting from the Greenfield Recorders, Aaron Lee Hoffman. Update on the Massachusetts Rural Policy Plan looks to prioritize rural equity and capacity. The Massachusetts Rural Policy Plan is being updated for the first time since being released in 2019, with a focus on supporting rural equity and capacity, as I just said. The updated document, now in its draft phase, is being developed by the Rural Policy Advisory Commission, which was created by the legislature way back in 2015. The commission, made up of state and regional planning officials, serves as a research body for issues that are considered critical to the welfare and vitality of rural communities. Now, this initial report, for 4 years in the making, now here we sit 2026, nearly 7 years after its release. Why is it being updated now, Aaron Lee?
Sure. So the updates really are designed to kind of, it sounds like, be a reflection of the past couple years of progress. So some things that were happening over the past couple years in terms of progress from last year's update was, getting the Rural Development Fund, Ann Goby coming in as a commissioner, and a couple of other points. And I think, updating it really just kind of gives them a guidebook over the next couple of years in terms of what are some things that rural communities are going to be thinking about, as we're moving into the future. A big part of this from 2019 till now, we had a global pandemic. And of course, no one in 2019 could have predicted that was going to happen.
This big thing happened.
This big thing happened. And now, moving into this plan, it's taking a look at, some of those accomplishments from 2019, but also counting, some of the things that had happened over the past couple years as they're moving forward. And I think at this point, really just making sure that they've got the capacity, as we're talking here, resources available for rural communities to begin moving into the future. Big part of it also talked about AI and data centers and municipalities handling that part of it too within this plan. So definitely a pulse on where things are going.
Yeah, it touched on so many different avenues. And when you talk about technology, broadband, which we've been talking about in Western Massachusetts forever.
Right.
We're still not fully connected digitally
Yes.
as a 413 community. But another thing that you touched on is this regional model for emergency services. And I know that this is still in draft form, but how is that taking shape? How is it being talked about?
Sure, and I'll double back a little bit because a lot of these regional models of, emergency services has actually been a conversation that's been ongoing for a long time. A lot of these communities have already put together regional models and are actually within the weeds now of really kind of working out the final frameworks for what's going to be happening here. The towns up in Leiden and Bernardston, they're like sister communities, and they are a very rural community together. So they're currently looking at making sure and figuring out how they're going to blend their police and fire departments. When you look at those two towns geographically, it's a very rural spot. There's a lot of roadway, and if you think of the vastness of Franklin County too, from West County to Orange and, out toward Athol, that's could be close to an hour for some people depending on where you're driving. So, we're talking about a very wide swath of land that emergency services have to cover and have to get to quickly. So the regionalization discussions here are really meant to increase that capacity, as the rural policy plan talks a bit about, but also increasing service, increasing staffing, and being able to make sure that, folks who are providing these these essential services are available when the calls come out for these, medical emergencies, if there's something happening on the Connecticut River and they need to mobilize many, many resources at once, having that capacity to be able to do that is a big part of this discussion here. And at least from where this will move into the future, FERCOG has received a federal earmark to begin studying police regionalization. They're looking at some state funding to be able to look at emergency services regionalization for EMS more broadly. And a couple months ago, sometime last fall, Senator Ed Markey came to the Greenfield Fire Department, and he had a big discussion with local emergency leaders who also told him, federally and at this level, we really need support, but also considering at the same time our emergency dispatchers, Chief John Pachurik with the Deerfield Police Department, he had said to Senator Ed Markey that the Shelburne Control, which is where dispatch comes out for a large part of the county, they have 2 people on staff at any given time. Wow. And can you imagine being one of 2 people within a room handling these calls and being on the shift all the time and really need to be on your game? If there's 2 of them that are handling all these calls, imagine what that does to an individual as a worker. So all these conversations are really about that capacity.
Yeah, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure. We all live in the 413, whether we live in a rural community or not. We certainly enjoy the fruit of it. As you're reading through Aaron Lee's reporting, what stands out to you, Phil?
I think probably one of the biggest things that Aaron touched on is looking at sort of the future of AI in data centers, in particular because, and this is what Aaron mentioned her reporting, a lot of data center developers are looking at rural areas. And that's because property values are lower. They can sort of pitch themselves as this like really big dog economic developer, be like, we're going to pay a bunch of taxes. You're going to get so much money. Please build my big data center. And I'm really curious, what the framework for that's going to look like, because the entire state is and the entire country is really still reckoning with what we want out of these data centers, what is worth it, what is not. Locally, we've already had, not necessarily in Franklin County, but in Holyoke and Westfield, those city councils have both struck down data centers in some capacity. It's a 1-year moratorium in Westfield. It's an outright ban in Holyoke. And kind of in dialogue with that, Healy has now pulled back some of the tax incentives for building data centers in Massachusetts more broadly. So I think that's going to be, I'm really curious to see where that's going to shape out, because I don't think data centers are going away, and so it's really curious to see if we are going to be able to put down some guardrails to maybe prevent or sort of stymie this kind of huge swath of hyperscale development in these rural areas.
Shutesbury has also said no to data centers. My big data center, the big flashy movie for next summer.
And Carrie, I will note that Greenfield is in the process right now of putting together their data center moratorium, and the town of Gill that I cover, they passed a moratorium during their annual town meeting along with a battery energy storage moratorium. However, their town council has said your battery energy storage will probably not go through. Your data center moratorium at this point has a greater leg to stand on, so we'll see what the Attorney General ends up ruling there. But already communities are taking a stand on this.
More to come on all of it. The final plan on the rural policy plan to be distributed in September. All right. So World Cup winds down this weekend. The bronze final is on Saturday, France versus England. And then Sunday, it's Spain versus Argentina, which kicks off in New Jersey, all according to ESPN, because I haven't watched a single second. So it's only fitting
I'm the same.
that we are going to talk soccer.
Yes.
A soccer mystery here in the 413. So it's twists, turns, who done it, but more in this particular case, it's more about who hasn't done it and why. Dusty Christensen, you looked into this story of a Northampton developer who built a soccer field, and now 20 years later, it's not really there. Where did this story come from, the idea?
I am somebody I'm not a good soccer player. Some might even say I'm bad. I play on an over 40 team called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think I'm the latter part of that. But I've always been interested in soccer and had heard some discussion about this field just off of Bridge Road in Northampton that never came to fruition. I was always curious about it, and eventually as a reporter, you get curious enough that you start digging into something. About 20 years ago, as you say, a little more, a developer in the city agreed that the developer would be allowed to build a little bit denser of a development in exchange for giving over some open space land to the city. This is a classic process lots of municipalities go through. It's part of sort of like these smart growth strategies to build density and thus like walkability. There's a lot of positives both for a city and for a developer here. Initially, the plan was for this field to be community gardens, but they decided ultimately to build a soccer field. And it seemed at the time like everyone was really excited about this idea. If you go back and read old news stories, one of the assistant superintendents, I believe, for schools was into the idea. The developers were into it. but there is no field there. The developer did do all the work to make the field level. It is still mowed, I believe, by the schools.
But there's no soccer goalposts.
No, there's
no
fence.
lines. There's none of the sort of telltale signs of like this is actually a soccer field.
And
right?
unless you
Kids
are
do
in the
sled
know,
in the winter though. So the sledding part sort of happened.
Yes, so there is also like a pretty steep portion of this land that was meant to be a sledding hill as well, as you mentioned. The big reaction after we published this story is a lot of people just had no idea that this was public land, that this was a field you could play on, that this was a sledding hill that was public. And I think that's our job as journalists, is to put information out there for people. I think some people saw this story and said like, oh, stop the presses, like a thing didn't happen, like a story about news that didn't happen. But like a lot of reactions that we got were from people who said, oh, like we could use this to alleviate some of the playing challenges on Florence fields, those beautiful fields that the city does have. It's part of the reason they didn't develop this is they have this big soccer playing field now. And this is also sort of a toolbox that municipalities have. Northampton uses it a lot. And there is a way that you can promote affordable housing development, for example, with this very same tool.
I was just going to say, in the Berkshires, I've seen it. The recent example, or more, an example I can point to pretty quickly in Lenox and Pittsfield, they'll trade off density for affordability in exchange for affordability promises from a developer. So it's not like Northampton is alone in using this type of a development toolbox. I guess for me, what stood out was the fact that, if this was the trade-off, right, to have this soccer field in exchange for what the developers received in the development, the little light goes off in the back of my reporter brain. It's like, well, what else didn't get developed as a result of some of these deals in other communities? But Rich Parr, as I understand it, you don't live far from these fields.
I live down the street from this, and I did not know that this existed at all. I've taken my kids sledding on this hill, but I thought it was part of Bear Hill. I thought it was part of the development, and I thought we were sort of semi-trespassing. But now I know. Now I know we can. I'm just gonna do it all the time now. This abuts also the middle school, right? So the JFK Middle School, and then essentially across the street from the parking lot is where this soccer field is supposed to be. I will say, as a soccer parent in Northampton, I was nodding along with you about the complaints about Florence Field. They shut that field down at a drop of rain because they
smell rain in the air.
My poor,
because you might mess up the grass.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh.
From the non-soccer player.
Exactly.
Okay.
My 13-year-old had to play in the heat of June because so many games got canceled this very wet spring that we had, because those fields they're very precious about them. So I think it would be good to use this field a little bit more than they're using it now.
Dusty, what did the developer of the Bear Hill project say when you reached out to them about where did the soccer field go?
I think to the developers' credit, like they, at least looking at the documents from 20 years ago, they did their part. They, I don't know to what extent they were super excited about it or not. We didn't get a chance to talk to them for this story, but the field at least could be used there. It is now, as my understanding, up to the Parks and Rec Department, for example, to actually make use of this space. There's some challenges there. It would have to have an ADA compliant path, for example, and other things. That all costs money at a time when cities, including Northampton, are struggling with their budgets. And so, it is challenging for city officials. I don't want to say that they can just wave a magic wand over it and turn this into a soccer field. There are some complications there, but it's my understanding of the city that the developer did their part, and now it's on the city to make it happen, or not.
Fascinating. This got me curious about where we are in the overall push in Massachusetts for the housing stock that we need. And there was a recent story from Mass Live that said 34,500 homes were built in Massachusetts last year in June, according to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And interestingly, Franklin County is leading the pack percentage-wise when it comes to housing units built against the larger need. They built 90% of their way to the goal. So, some good news when it comes to housing in Massachusetts. I want to thank our rundown panel this morning: Dusty Christensen of the Shoestring, Aaron Lee Hoffman of the Greenfield Recorder, Rich Parr of Massing Polling, and Phil Bishop from the NEPM newsroom, and Charlie, who's hanging out with us here in the board op room this morning. You are listening to the Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Happy World Cup weekend, everybody. Get out there and make it a great one. We'll see you next week.